In my house, affection was measured by how much debt I could settle. For 36 years, I was the invisible safety net beneath my sister's high-wire act. My parents thought my silence was submission, but they were wrong. It was preparation. I did not need a scene to destroy the illusion of our happy family. All it took was one letter, left on a cold granite counter, to make them realize they had bet on the wrong daughter. My name is Claire Donovan. At 36 years old, I had built a life in Ridgeport, Oregon, that looked, from the outside, like a structure of reinforced steel. I lived in a pristine apartment overlooking the river, maintained a credit score that hovered near 800, and adhered to a routine that kept the chaos of the world at a comfortable distance. Ridgeport is the kind of city where the rain feels like a permanent resident, gray and relentless, seeping into the bones of the Victorian architecture. It matched the temperament I had cultivated over decades: quiet, dutiful, invisible. To the neighbors and the church committee, the Donovan family was a portrait of American success. My father, a retired architect with a firm handshake, and my mother, a former school board treasurer who baked the best pies in the county, were the pillars of our community. And then there was Evelyn, my younger sister. She was the splash of vibrant color in our monochrome world. If I was the foundation, Evelyn was the chandelier, fragile, expensive, and demanding everyone's attention just by existing. We had Sunday dinners without fail: roast chicken, green beans, and polite conversation about the weather or the neighbors. It was a performance, and we all knew our lines perfectly. The cracks in the foundation started appearing when we were teenagers, hairline fractures that nobody else saw or cared to acknowledge. If Evelyn needed a new dress for prom, $500 appeared out of nowhere. If I needed textbooks for my advanced placement classes, I was told to pick up extra shifts at the diner because it would build character. It was subtle at first, a smile that lingered longer on her face, a forgiveness granted to her that was strictly withheld from me. I learned early on that my role was not to shine, but to absorb the shadows. I became an expert in silence. I swallowed the unfairness until it sat heavy in my stomach like a cold stone. I convinced myself that being the dependable one, the strong one, was a badge of honor rather than a burden. My escape was my work. At Northvale Concepts, I was not Evelyn's shadow. I was a senior design lead. My colleagues respected my eye for detail and my ability to salvage projects that others had given up on. When I walked into that glass-walled office downtown, I felt a sense of solidity that my childhood home never provided. There, my value was calculated in billable hours and successful client pitches, clear and undeniable. Just last week, I had saved a contract worth $2 million by noticing a flaw in the zoning permit applications that everyone else had missed. My boss had shaken my hand, looked me in the eye, and told me I was indispensable. That word rang in my ears. Indispensable. At home. I was merely convenient. It was a Tuesday evening when the illusion began to dissolve. I had finished work early, around 4:30, and decided to drop by my parents' house to deliver a set of tax documents my father had asked me to review. I did not call ahead. That was my first mistake. Or perhaps it was my first stroke of luck. The house sat on a hill, looking exactly as it had for 30 years. Pristine lawn, white trim, the heavy oak door that always stuck slightly in the humidity. I unlocked the door with my key. The hallway smelled of lemon polish and old paper. It was quiet, but not the peaceful kind of quiet. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room holding its breath. I walked down the corridor, my heels clicking softly on the hardwood. I felt less like a daughter returning home and more like an intruder, a guest who had overstayed a welcome that was never really extended. The photos on the wall seemed to mock me. Evelyn graduating, Evelyn winning a pageant, Evelyn smiling with a man I barely knew. There were photos of me, too, but they were smaller, placed in the corners, fillers in the gallery of my sister's life. I reached the living room but stopped dead before crossing the threshold. The door to my father's study was ajar, just a sliver of yellow light cutting across the dark hallway. I intended to knock, to announce my presence like a good daughter, but then I heard my name. Claire is never going to look that closely. David, she just signs where we tell her to, my mother said. Her voice sounded thin, vibrating with a nervous energy I rarely heard. My father's voice rumbled in response, dismissive and sharp. I know. That is why we use her account. Evelyn needs this infusion to clear the debt before the wedding. Claire doesn't need it. She lives like a nun. She won't miss $10,000 if we move it slowly. I froze. My hand hovered over the door handle, trembling. My heart hammered against my ribs, a sudden, violent rhythm that made my ears ring. They were not talking about me with affection. They were discussing me the way a butcher discusses a piece of meat, deciding which parts to carve off for the best cut. But if she finds out, my mother whispered, the fear audible. She won't, my father snapped. Claire is loyal. She is predictable. That is her only virtue. The conversation in the study did not end with the theft of my money. It shifted, deepening into territory I had never dared to map out in my mind. I pressed my back against the wall, the cool plaster seeping through my blouse, grounding me as the floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. They were moving on to the final arrangements. The will. The lawyer sent over the draft for the trust fund, my father said. His voice was calm, the voice of a man reviewing a grocery list rather than disinheriting a child. The house in Ridgeport, the summer cabin, and the primary retirement accounts. It is all structured to go to Evelyn. I waited for my mother to interrupt. I waited for the woman who had taught me to tie my shoes, who had nursed me through chicken pox, to say that this was madness. I waited for her to say that I had paid for the new roof on that house 2 years ago. I waited for her to mention the $40,000 I had contributed to their rainy day fund just last winter. Is it wise to put it all in her name at once? My mother asked. Her hesitation was not moral, it was practical. She was not worried about fairness. She was worried about competence. She will learn, my father replied, the sound of paper shuffling marking his words. Evelyn has the spirit of this family. She understands people. She understands connections. Claire is a worker. She survives. If we leave the assets to Claire, she will just hoard them. Evelyn needs the safety net to maintain the lifestyle we expect of her. Besides, she is the one who will give us grandchildren who actually visit. The cruelty of it was so casual it took my breath away. I was not a daughter to them. I was a utility. I was the backup generator kept in the basement, serviced only when the main power grid failed, destined to hum along in the dark while the lights shone brightly upstairs. My mother did not argue. The silence that followed my father's declaration was heavier than any scream. That silence was her signature on the document. It was her agreement that I was expendable. I felt a physical sickness rise in my throat. I had to leave. If I stayed 1 second longer, if I stormed in there and demanded answers, I would give them exactly what they expected, a tantrum they could dismiss, a reason to call me emotional or unstable. I took a step back, then another. My heels, which had clicked so ominously on the way in, were silent now on the runner rug. I moved like a ghost in the house I had helped pay to maintain. I reached the heavy oak front door and turned the handle with agonizing slowness. The latch clicked, a sound that seemed to echo like a gunshot in my own ears, but the voices in the study droned on, oblivious. I slipped out into the damp Oregon evening. The rain had started again, a fine mist that clung to my skin. I walked to my car, got in, and sat there for a long moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I did not cry. Tears were for people who still had hope that things could be fixed. I had no hope left. I had clarity. I drove home in a trance. The city lights of Ridgeport blurred past, meaningless streaks of yellow and red. When I entered my apartment, the quiet was different. It was no longer lonely, it was fortified. At 9:30, my phone buzzed on the kitchen island. The screen lit up with a message from my mother. There was no greeting, no question about my day. "You forgot the tax files. Your father is annoyed. Bring them over tomorrow before 8. Do not make us wait." I stared at the glowing letters. They did not know I had been there. They did not know I had heard them stripping me of my birthright while planning to steal my savings. They thought I was still their obedient soldier, ready to march over at dawn. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the keypad. I could have exploded. I could have typed out a transcript of their conversation, but that would have been messy. That would have given them a chance to explain, to lie, to gaslight me into believing I had misunderstood. I typed 2 words. No. Never. I hit send. Then, I turned the phone off and placed it face down on the counter. The severance was absolute. The silence in my apartment was absolute, but my mind was loud with the echoes of the past decade. I sat on my sofa, wrapped in a blanket that offered no warmth, staring at the dark waters of the river outside. My phone lay face down on the counter, a black brick of disconnected potential, but I did not need to look at it to know what was happening. My mother would be confused by my refusal. My father would be indignant, but neither of them would be worried about me. They would be worried about the disruption to their supply chain. Memory is a traitorous thing. For years, I had edited my own history, cropping out the exploitation to focus on the moments where I felt useful. Now, the unedited footage played in a loop. I remembered the winter 5 years ago when my father's architectural firm lost a major bid. The heating bill for their 4-bedroom house was overdue, and the mortgage was 2 months behind. "It is just a temporary cash flow problem. Claire," my father had said, his hand trembling slightly as he held his coffee cup. We just need $15,000 to bridge the gap. The market will bounce back." I had emptied my savings account the next morning. I told myself I was being a good daughter. I told myself that family supports family, but the market did bounce back, and the firm recovered. Yet, the subject of repayment never came up. When I had gently mentioned it a year later, my mother had laughed, a brittle sound that dismissed my concern entirely. "Oh, Claire, surely you are not counting pennies with your own parents. We raised you. We paid for your braces. Let's not be petty." I had swallowed the word petty like a shard of glass. I had let it go. Then there was Evelyn's boutique. It was a passion project that lasted exactly 14 months. When the rent for her storefront came due and she was short, it was my phone that rang. "She is fragile. Claire," my mother had whispered into the receiver, her voice thick with staged panic. "If she fails at this, it will destroy her confidence. Please, just cover the lease for 6 months. She will pay you back when the summer rush hits." The summer rush never came. The boutique closed. Evelyn went to Europe to find herself on my parents' credit card, and I was left with a tax write-off I never asked for and a hole in my bank account the size of a mid-sized sedan. I stood up and walked to the kitchen island. I opened my laptop, the screen illuminating the dark room with a harsh, artificial blue light. I logged into my banking portal. It was time to look at the autopsy of my own finances. The list of automatic payments scrolling down the screen was nauseating. It was not just occasional help, it was a systemic parasite. There was the recurring transfer for my parents' supplemental health insurance. There was the auto-pay for the family cell phone plan, which included the international data package Evelyn used so freely. There was the premium for the car insurance on the Lexus my father drove, a car I had co-signed for because his credit utilization was too high at the time. $2,400 a month. That was the price of my admission into the family. That was the rent I paid to be tolerated. I looked at the numbers, and for the first time, I did not see obligations. I saw a prison sentence. I saw the down payment on a house I never bought. I saw the vacations I never took. I saw the retirement I was delaying while securing theirs. I realized then that I was not the daughter. I was the crisis manager. I was the silent partner in the business of keeping up appearances. They did not love me. They relied on me. There is a terrifying difference. A deep, bone-weary exhaustion settled over me. It was not the tiredness that comes from a long day at work. It was the fatigue of someone who has been carrying a heavy stone uphill for 36 years, only to be told that the stone was never really there. I sat there as the hours ticked by. 3 in the morning, 4 in the morning. The sky outside began to shift from charcoal to a bruised purple. I could not go back. I could not unhear my father's voice calling me a worker. I could not unsee the will that erased my existence. If I continued to pay these bills, I would be complicit in my own abuse. The sun crested over the horizon, casting a pale, unforgiving light across my living room. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air and the cold reality of my life. I placed my hand on the mouse. My finger hovered over the cancel recurring payment button for the cell phone plan. Goodbye, I whispered to the empty room. I clicked. Then I moved to the insurance. Click. Then the car payments. Click. With every click, the fear that had tightened my chest for years began to loosen, replaced by a strange, cold clarity. It was done. The sun was fully up now. I stood in the center of my apartment, severed from the only people I had ever tried to please, and for the first time in my life, I felt entirely, terrifyingly alone, and it felt like freedom. The morning sun was fully awake, and so was I. I sat at my kitchen island with my laptop open, the screen glowing with the stark interface of my banking portal. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, but I did not need caffeine. Adrenaline was coursing through my veins, sharp and electric. I navigated to the recurring transfer page. There it was, the scheduled payment for the landscaping service at my parents' house. $150 a month to keep their hydrangeas blooming while my own balcony plants withered from neglect. I moved the cursor. My finger hovered over the trackpad. For a second, a phantom weight pressed on my chest, the conditioned reflex of a lifetime of obedience. Click. Canceled. I breathed out. The air left my lungs in a rush. I moved to the next item, the premium cable package my mother insisted she needed for her cooking shows. $85. Click. Canceled. Then came the heaviest chain of all the supplemental credit card I had given Evelyn 3 years ago for emergencies. I clicked on the transaction history. There were charges from yesterday, a spa treatment at the Gilded Lily, a dinner bill for $300. Emergency. I whispered to the empty room, the word tasting like copper in my mouth. Right. I selected the card settings. Freeze card, report lost or stolen. Click. The screen flashed a green confirmation banner. It was done. With every button I pressed, I felt a physical sensation, like a diver cutting away heavy weights to shoot toward the surface. It was a terrified, giddy lightness. I was severing the invisible umbilical cords that had drained me dry, one transaction at a time. Suddenly, the silence was shattered. My phone, lying face down on the counter, began to buzz. It vibrated against the granite, an angry, persistent sound. I flipped it over. The screen lit up with a photo of my mother, smiling a smile that never quite reached her eyes. I stared at it. Usually, this was the moment my stomach would not, the moment I would scramble to answer, apologetic and breathless. But today, I just watched the screen until it went dark. Then it lit up again. Father. I reached out and slid the switch on the side of the phone to silent. I dropped the device into my purse like it was a stone. Not today, I said aloud. I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. The drive to Northvale Concepts was a blur of gray highway and rain, but my mind was laser-focused. When I walked into the office, the hum of the air conditioning and the smell of industrial carpet cleaner felt like a sanctuary. Here, I was not a disappointment. Here, I was a revenue generator. I sat at my desk and unlocked the bottom drawer. I pulled out a thick, dusty binder. It was a project titled The Urban Green Interface. 2 years ago. I had excitedly shown the initial sketches to my father during Sunday dinner. He had glanced at them over his roast beef and sneered, "Modular housing. Claire, it looks like a stack of shipping containers. Nobody wants to live in a box. Leave the real architecture to the men who build skyscrapers." I had buried the project the next day, but today, I opened the binder. The designs were brilliant. They were cost-effective, sustainable, and perfect for the new zoning laws in the warehouse district. I smoothed the page, my hand steady. I picked up the office landline. I dialed the number for Harbor Line Developments, a number I had memorized but never dared to use. Harbor Line Developments, Executive Office. A crisp female voice answered. "This is Claire Donovan from Northvale Concepts," I said. My voice sounded deeper, stronger than usual. "I have a proposal for the Riverside District that aligns with your current expansion. I need 10 minutes with Mr. Sterling." There was a pause on the line. I could hear typing in the background. "Mr. Sterling is fully booked until the middle of next month," the assistant said, her tone dismissive. I did not apologize. I did not hang up. Tell him I have the solution to the density cap on 4th Street, I said, leaning forward in my chair. Tell him I know how to bypass the hearing requirement." The typing stopped. The silence stretched for 10 seconds. "Hold, please," she said. I waited. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a wild drumbeat, but my face remained impassive. I watched the rain streak against the window. The assistant returned. "Ms. Donovan, Mr. Sterling can give you 15 minutes this Thursday at 2 o'clock. Do not be late." "I will be there," I said. I hung up the phone. A smile, small and sharp, touched my lips. I looked down at the binder. My father was wrong. Evelyn was irrelevant. I was done playing the supporting character in their tragedy. I was writing my own script now. The withdrawal symptoms of my family were immediate and violent. By Wednesday afternoon, the digital silence I had imposed had turned into a cacophony on my locked screen. My phone, still silenced, lit up with a relentless rhythm that bordered on manic. It started with confusion. A text from Evelyn asking if the bank servers were down. Then, a notification from the joint account asking for a verification code I refused to send. By the time I left the office for a late lunch, the confusion had curdled into rage. I sat on a bench in the small park near Northvale Concepts, a turkey sandwich in my lap that I had no appetite for. I finally allowed myself to look at the backlog of messages. Evelyn had left 12 texts in the span of 1 hour. The card was declined at the bridal salon. "Fix it. Claire. Are you there? This is embarrassing. The stylist is looking at me. You selfish bitch." Pick up the phone. I scrolled past them, my pulse steady. The insults did not sting the way they used to. They felt distant, like static on a radio station I was driving away from. Then I saw the voicemail from my father. I hesitated, the old instinct to obey twitching in my fingers, but I pressed play and held the phone to my ear. Claire. His voice was low, devoid of warmth, carrying that distinct tone of disappointed authority he used when a contractor failed to deliver. "I do not know what kind of game you are playing, or if this is some sort of clerical error you have neglected to correct, but it ends now. Evelyn is in distress. You will transfer $5,000 to her personal account by 5 o'clock to cover the deposits. We will discuss your attitude this weekend. Do not make me call your office." The threat was implicit. "Do not make me embarrass you professionally." He thought my job was a hobby, something he could threaten to disrupt, like taking a toy away from a child. I deleted the voicemail. I did not reply. For the first time in my life, I let his command hang in the air, unanswered and impotent. I stood up to throw away my uneaten lunch, and that was when the air shifted. I felt a prickle on the back of my neck. the sensation of eyes boring into me. I turned toward the street. Evelyn was there. She was standing on the corner of 4th and Main, just 30 feet away. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere coat that probably cost more than my first car, but she did not look like the golden child today. Her hair was slightly windblown, and her posture was rigid. She had tracked me down. She knew where I worked, of course, but she had never visited, not once in 7 years. She saw me and marched across the street, ignoring the flashing hand on the crosswalk signal. A taxi honked, but she did not flinch. She reached me in seconds, her face flushed with a mixture of exertion and fury. "You!" She gasped, her chest heaving. "You! You think this is funny? Do you have any idea how humiliating it was? I had to leave the dress there. Claire, I had to walk out empty-handed while the salesgirls whispered people were starting to look. A woman walking a poodle slowed down. A businessman paused to check his watch, his eyes darting toward the scene. "Hello, Evelyn," I said. My voice was quiet, forcing her to lean in, stripping her of the audience she wanted. "Transfer the money," she hissed, grabbing my wrist. Her grip was tight, desperate. "Dad said you are just having a moment. Snap out of it. I need to go back there before they close." I looked down at her hand on my sleeve. Then I looked at her eyes. I expected to see the usual arrogance, the utter certainty that the world revolved around her desires. But it was not there, behind the anger, behind the layers of expensive makeup. There was panic. She was terrified. Without my money, she was just a girl with expensive taste and no means to support it. She was hollow. "No," I said. Evelyn blinked. She recoiled as if I had slapped her. "What? What did you say?" "I said no," I repeated, stepping back so her hand fell from my arm. "I am not your bank, Evelyn. Use your own money." "I cannot," she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Everything is tied up in the investments." "You know that. Not my problem," I said. I turned my back on her. It was the hardest thing I had ever done physically. My legs felt heavy, and every instinct screamed that I was breaking the natural order of the universe. But I walked. I walked back toward my building, listening to her shout my name, her voice shrill and desperate. "Claire, come back here. Mom is going to... She is going to kill you." I reached the revolving doors of my office building and pushed through. As the glass pane rotated, cutting off the sound of her screaming, I glanced back one last time. Evelyn was standing on the sidewalk, looking small and defeated, but she was not the only one there. Across the street, standing in the shadow of a newsstand, was a man. He was wearing a dark jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. He was not looking at the traffic. He was not looking at his phone. He was looking directly at Evelyn, and then, as if sensing my gaze, his eyes shifted to me. He did not smile. He simply watched, a notebook tucked under his arm, witnessing the cracks forming in the perfect Donovan facade. I did not know who he was, but a cold shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the wind. The audience was growing. 2 days after Evelyn's public meltdown, the man in the baseball cap made his move. I was sitting in a corner booth of a coffee shop 3 blocks from my office, reviewing the zoning laws for the Harbor Line project. The rain was hammering against the glass, blurring the outside world into streaks of gray and silver. Ms. Donovan. I looked up. It was him. Up close. He looked younger than I had thought, perhaps 30, with tired eyes and a nervous tick in his jaw. He held a wet manila envelope against his chest like a shield. "I am Claire," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Do I know you?" "No, but I know your sister," he said. He slid into the seat opposite me without asking. "I am Liam. I handled the inventory and basic accounting for Evelyn's boutique before it went under. I think you need to see this." He pushed the envelope across the table. It was thick. I hesitated, looking from the stained paper to his face. Why, I asked. Because she owes me $4,000 in back wages, Liam said, his voice tightening. And because I saw you on the street the other day, I realized you are not in on it. I always thought you were the silent backer, the one pulling the strings. I opened the envelope. Inside were copies of bank statements, invoices, and emails. I began to read. The coffee shop noise faded into a dull hum as the world narrowed down to the numbers on the page. It was a masterclass in manipulation. I saw the dates where I had transferred money $15,000 here, $6,000 there marked as emergency loan or vendor payment in my own records. But on Evelyn's ledger, they were listed differently. They were listed as revenue. She was using your money to inflate the store's income, Liam explained, pointing to a highlighted column. She would take your check, funnel it through a shell account, and pay it back into the business as a sale to make the books look healthy to investors. Then she would pull the cash out for consulting fees paid to herself. My stomach churned. I turned the page. There was a credit application for a business loan from 2 years ago. It was co-signed, Claire Donovan. The signature was a clumsy forgery, but it had been enough for a predatory lender. She defaulted on this 6 months ago, Liam said softly. The notices are going to a P.O. box she set up in your name. You are going to get hit with a lawsuit if you do not get ahead of this. I sat back, the leather booth squeaking beneath me. The betrayal I had felt earlier was emotional. This was criminal. My parents had told me Evelyn was just bad with numbers. They had lied. She was not bad with numbers. She was calculating. She had used my credit, my money, and my name as a human shield to protect her lifestyle. Every time I thought I was saving her from drowning, I was actually funding the boat she was using to smuggle my future away. Why tell me now, I asked. Because she called me yesterday, Liam said. He looked down at his hands. She asked if I knew anyone who could alter some tax documents. She is desperate and dangerous. I looked at the documents again. This was the smoking gun. If I took this to the police, Evelyn would go to jail. If I took this to my parents, they would likely accuse me of fabricating it to hurt their precious angel. They would deny the reality even as it stared them in the face. I closed the folder. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage that was crystallizing in my chest. I had been the dutiful daughter, the ATM, the backup plan. Now, I was the prosecutor. Can I keep this, I asked. Please, Liam said. He looked relieved, as if he had just passed a heavy stone to someone else. Just keep me out of it when it blows up. It won't blow up, I said, standing up and tucking the folder under my arm. Not yet. I walked out into the rain. I did not go to the police station. I did not go to my parents' house to scream and shout. That was what the old Claire would have done. Seek validation. Seek an apology. The new Claire had a different objective. I went back to my office. I locked the door. I opened a new file on my computer and began to scan every page Liam had given me. I cross-referenced them with my own bank statements. I built a timeline. I built a case. I was not going to expose Evelyn with a shout. I was going to expose her with a whisper that would shatter the earth beneath her feet. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of a lawyer I had met at a networking event 3 years ago, a woman known for her ruthlessness in fraud cases. Hello? I said when she answered. I need to draft a letter, and I need it to be bulletproof. The conference room at Harborline Development smelled of expensive leather and ambition. I sat across from Marcus Sterling, a man who built skyscrapers for breakfast and did not suffer fools. The contract lay between us, a document thick with clauses that would redefine the skyline of Ridgeport. I picked up the pen. My hand did not shake. I signed my name. The loops of the letters sharp and decisive. Welcome to the team, Ms. Donovan, Sterling said, extending his hand. This is a $5 million commitment. Do not make me regret it. I never regret a good investment. I replied, gripping his hand firmly. And neither will you. Walking out of that building, I felt a rush that was purer than any drug. This success had no strings attached. It did not belong to the Donovan family trust. It did not require my mother's approval or my father's nod. It was mine. Entirely, unequivocally mine. I had secured my future in the afternoon. Now, it was time to dismantle my past. I drove straight to the office of Sarah Jenkins, the attorney I had called the previous day. She was waiting for me, a woman with eyes like flint and a suit that cost more than Evelyn's wedding dress. On her desk lay the draft we had spent the last 24 hours perfecting. It was not a lawsuit. Not yet. It was a statement of facts. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, tapping the document with a manicured fingernail. "Once this is sent, there is no going back. This is scorching the earth." "The earth was already scorched," I said, my voice flat. "I am just clearing the ashes." We went over the wording one last time. The letter did not use emotional language. It did not use words like hurt or betrayal. It used words like embezzlement, identity theft, and statute of limitations. We had attached Exhibit A, the bank statements showing the diversion of funds. Exhibit B, the forged loan application Liam had provided. Exhibit C, a detailed timeline of every loan that was never repaid, totaling over $75,000 in the last decade alone. It concluded with a formal declaration. I was severing all financial ties. I was resigning as their safety net. And if they attempted to contact me or my employer regarding these debts, the next document they received would be a criminal complaint filed with the district attorney. "It is perfect," I said, staring at the paper. It looked like a weapon. "Send it via courier. Priority delivery." To arrive when Sarah asked. "Tonight at 7, I answered. "They have called a family meeting." My father had summoned me via text that morning. Family discussion. 7:00 p.m. Attendance mandatory. We need to resolve Evelyn's situation. They were expecting me to walk through that door with my head down and my checkbook open. They were expecting the capitulation of the dutiful daughter. They were preparing their speeches about loyalty and sacrifice, ready to guilt me into covering the fraud Evelyn had committed. I checked into a hotel downtown, a place with high ceilings and no memories. I did not want to be in my apartment when the bomb went off. I ordered room service a steak, rare, and a glass of red wine. At 6:55, I imagined the scene at my parents' house. My mother would be nervously adjusting the coasters, checking the clock on the mantelpiece. My father would be pacing, rehearsing his stern lecture about family duty. Evelyn would be there, probably crying, playing the victim, waiting for her big sister to fix the mess she had made. They would be talking about me, wondering why I was late, complaining about my recent attitude. At 7 o'clock exactly, the doorbell would ring. They would open it, expecting me. Instead, they would find a uniformed courier with a heavy, cream-colored envelope sealed with the stamp of a law firm. I took a sip of wine. The liquid was rich and dark. I looked out the window at the city lights. I was not there to see their faces. I did not need to be. I had spent my life listening to them. Now, it was their turn to read. The silence in my hotel room was not empty. It was full of anticipation. The pieces were all in place. The game was over. I had just flipped the board. I sat in my hotel room, staring at the digital clock on the nightstand. 7:15. Across the city, in the living room where I had spent a lifetime making myself small, the explosion had occurred. I did not need to be a fly on the wall to know exactly how it played out. I knew the players in this tragedy better than they knew themselves. At 7 o'clock sharp, the courier would have handed the heavy envelope to my father. He would have taken it with a sigh of relief, convinced that it contained a check, or perhaps a deed transfer, a silent apology for my rebellion. My mother would have been sitting on the edge of the velvet sofa, smoothing her skirt, ready to forgive me the moment the money hit the account. And Evelyn. She would have been checking her reflection in the hallway mirror, annoyed that I was late, but confident that her safety net was back in place. About time, my father likely muttered, tearing the seal. She didn't even have the decency to deliver it in person. She is embarrassed. David, my mother would have soothed. Let's just get this deposited so Evelyn can pay the venue. But there was no check. There was only the thick cream-colored paper of the legal notice, and the cold, hard weight of the exhibits attached. I can picture the silence that followed. It would have started as confusion. My father reading the first paragraph, his brow furrowing. Notice of severance. Allegations of financial impropriety. What is this? He would have asked, his voice losing its authoritative boom. Embezzlement, fraud. What Evelyn would have laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. That is ridiculous. Claire is just being dramatic. Give it to me. She would have reached for the papers, but my father would have held them tight. His eyes would have been scanning Exhibit A, the bank transfers, the dates, the destinations. Claire sent $15,000 on November 3rd for the roof repair. My father read, his voice trembling with a dawn of horror. But the money didn't go to the contractor. It went to the Sapphire Lounge and Saks Fifth Avenue. That's a mistake, Evelyn would have said quickly. Too quickly. The bank made a mistake. I can explain that. And here, my father continued, flipping the page to Exhibit B, a business loan application, $40,000, co-signed by Claire Donovan. So Evelyn shrugged. She helped me. That is what sisters do. The signature is dated 2 days after Claire was in the hospital for her appendectomy, my father said, looking up. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She didn't sign this. Evelyn, you did. The room must have felt very small suddenly. My mother, who had always protected Evelyn, who had always smoothed over the rough edges, would have looked from her husband to her golden child. Evelyn, she whispered, Did you steal from your sister? I didn't steal. Evelyn's voice rose, shrill and panicked. I borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. Claire has plenty of money. She doesn't even spend it. She just sits on it like a dragon. And the legal threat, my father read the final page. If we contact her, she files criminal charges. That was the moment the wall broke. Evelyn stood up, her face twisted in a mask of pure, unfiltered terror. She looked at the papers, then at the phone that lay silent on the table. She realized the game was not just paused, it was over. You're joking, she screamed, the sound tearing through the polite atmosphere of the house. You're joking. She wouldn't do that. She loves me. She needs us. She doesn't need us, my father said, his voice sounding old and defeated. He dropped the papers onto the coffee table. They fanned out, a collage of my exploitation. We needed her. Fix it, Evelyn shrieked, grabbing my mother's arm. Call her. Tell her to stop. I can't go to court. I have a wedding to plan. There is no wedding. Evelyn, my father said, sinking into his armchair. We have no money. And if this letter is true, you have no credit. No. Evelyn paced the room, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Mom, do something. My mother reached for the phone. Her fingers, usually so steady when she balanced the family checkbook, would have been clumsy. She dialed my number. In my hotel room, my phone lit up. Mom. I watched it vibrate against the nightstand. I did not touch it. I took another sip of my wine and watched the screen go dark. Back in that house. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was the silence of a structure that had lost its load-bearing wall. My father staring at the floor, my mother holding a dead phone, and Evelyn standing in the wreckage of her own making, realizing that the sister she had used as a stepping stone had just pulled the ground out from under her feet, They were alone with the truth, and for the first time in 30 years, there was no one left to clean up the mess. The fallout was not a wave, it was a tsunami. When I stopped being the dam that held back the consequences of my sister's actions, the water destroyed everything in its path. The investigation was swift and brutal. My lawyer had done her job with surgical precision. By reporting the identity theft and the forged signature on the business loan to the bank's fraud department, she had triggered an automatic inquiry that the local police could not ignore. 3 days after the letter was delivered, a sheriff's deputy knocked on the door of my parents' house. I was not there to see it, but in a town like Ridgeport, news travels faster than light. The neighbors saw the squad car in the driveway. They saw Evelyn, pale and shaking, being asked to produce identification. They saw the facade of the respectable Donovan family crumble into dust. The legal system does not care about Sunday dinners or family loyalty. It cares about documentation, and the documentation was damning. The forensic accountants found that Evelyn had not just forged my name, she had misappropriated funds from 2 other investors she had charmed at the country club. The total amount missing was over $150,000. The consequences were immediate. Evelyn's assets were frozen. Her bank accounts, which she had always treated as bottomless pits, were locked. The bridal shop, realizing the check for the venue had bounced and the bride was under investigation, canceled the contract. Her fiancé, a man who cared very much about his own reputation in the city council, ended the engagement via a press release. He did not even break up with her in person. He simply erased her from his life to save his own career. My parents were not spared because they had co-signed several of Evelyn's smaller loans I had refused to touch. Their retirement accounts were seized as collateral when she defaulted. The house they loved so much, the house where I had felt like a ghost, was placed under a lien. They were 65 years old, and they were facing financial ruin because they had bet on the wrong daughter. My phone continued to receive voicemails for 48 hours before I finally changed the number. The tone of the messages shifted from the initial anger to a desperate, weeping, begging. "Claire, please, you have to stop this." My mother sobbed in one message, her voice breaking into jagged pieces. "They are taking the car. They are talking about jail time for Evelyn. She is your sister." I deleted it. I did not feel a thrill of victory. I did not feel joy. I felt a profound, cold sense of inevitability. This was always going to happen. I had just delayed the crash for a decade. By stepping away, I had simply allowed gravity to take over. The social fallout was just as severe as the legal one. The church committee quietly removed my mother from the treasurer position. The invitations to the annual garden party stopped coming. The Donovans were no longer the pillars of the community. They were a cautionary tale whispered about over iced tea. I watched it all from the window of my new office at Harborline Developments. I was busy. The Riverside project was moving into the permitting phase, and for the first time in my life, my energy was focused entirely on building something that would last, rather than patching up something that was broken. I did not visit them. I did not send money. I did not intervene when I heard that Evelyn was looking at a plea deal that involved community service and probation, only avoiding prison because it was her first offense. I was done saving them. The cord was cut. One evening, leaving the office late, I drove past the exit for my parents' neighborhood. My hand tightened on the steering wheel, an old reflex to turn the blinker on, to go check on them, to write the check that would make the hurting stop. But I drove past. I kept driving until the city lights of Ridgeport faded in the rearview mirror and the road ahead opened up, dark and wide and entirely my own. I rolled down the window and let the cold Oregon air fill the car. It smelled of rain and pine and, for the first time, it smelled like a future I had chosen for myself. It has been exactly 6 months since the courier delivered that envelope. The final update arrived on my desk this morning. Not from my family, but from the legal team managing the dissolution of the liens. My childhood home, the sprawling house on the hill that demanded so much of my money to maintain, has been sold. My parents are moving into a small 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. It is a practical space, devoid of the grandeur they used to prize above all else. As for Evelyn, she is serving her probation quietly. She works at a community center now, answering phones for minimum wage, stripped of the credit cards and the status that defined her existence. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk and took out the copy of the letter I had written. For weeks, I had wrestled with a lingering guilt, wondering if I had been too harsh, wondering if I had destroyed them out of spite. But as I read the words one last time, the guilt evaporated. I realized that I had not destroyed anything. I had simply turned on the lights. The rot was already there, eating away at the foundation. I just stopped hiding it for them. My purpose was never revenge. My purpose was truth. And the truth, once released, had done the work all by itself. My office at Harborline Developments was bathed in sunlight. It poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the blueprints spread across my desk. This was not a space I rented, it was a space I earned. There were no shadows here. My phone sat on the corner of the desk, silent. I had unblocked their numbers a month ago, not because I wanted to talk, but because I wanted to test myself. I wanted to see if the urge to fix their problems would return. It never did. They never called. Perhaps they were too ashamed. Perhaps they finally understood that the Bank of Clare was closed forever. My assistant knocked on the glass door. "Ms. Donovan," she said, stepping in with a tablet in her hand. "The investors are here for the quarterly review. They are waiting for you in the boardroom." "Thank you, Sarah," I said. "I will be right there." I stood up and smoothed my blazer. I looked down at the letter in my hand one last time. I walked over to the shredder in the corner of the room. I fed the paper into the machine. I watched as the list of grievances, the evidence of my pain, and the history of my servitude were sliced into thin, unreadable strips. It was a quiet sound, like a sigh of relief. I walked to the window and looked out at the city of Ridgeport. The rain had stopped. The sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. I did not feel the need for an apology I would never get. I did not need them to acknowledge my worth. I knew who I was. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean air of the office. A smile touched my lips, small but unbreakable. I turned away from the window and walked toward the door to meet my future. I was finally, completely free. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today, so please leave a comment down below and share your thoughts on the ending. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel Mira Revenge Stories. Hit the like button and press the hype button to help this video reach even more people.